Darby's translation 1890. The Acts 25. Festus therefore, being come into the eparchy, after 3 days went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the chief of the Jews laid informations before him against Paul, and besought him, asking as a grace against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying people in wait to kill him on the way. Festus therefore answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself was about to set out shortly. Let therefore the persons of authority among you, says he, going down too, if there be anything in this man, accuse him. And having remained among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and on the next day, having sat down on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews who were come down from Jerusalem stood round, bringing many and grievous charges which they were not able to prove, Paul answering for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar, have I offended in anything. But Festus, desirous of obliging the Jews, to acquire their favor, answering Paul, said, Art thou willing to go up to Jerusalem, there to be judged before me concerning these things? But Paul said, I am standing before the judgment seat of Caesar, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou also very well knowest. If then I have done any wrong and committed anything worthy of death, I do not deprecate dying, but if there is nothing of those things of which they accuse me, no man can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, having conferred with the council, answered, Thou hast appealed to Caesar. To Caesar shalt thou go. And when certain days had elapsed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had spent many days there, Festus laid before the king the matters relating to Paul, saying, There is a certain man left prisoner by Felix, concerning whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid informations, requiring judgment against him, to whom I answered, It is not the custom of the Romans to give up any man before that the accused have the accusers face to face, and he have got opportunity of defense touching the charge. When therefore they had come together here, without putting it off, I sat the next day on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought, concerning whom the accusers, standing up, brought no such accusation of guilt as I supposed, but had against him certain questions of their own system of worship, and concerning a certain Jesus who was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be living. And as I myself was at a loss as to an inquiry into these things, I said, Was he willing to go to Jerusalem and there to be judged concerning these things? But Paul having appealed to be kept for the cognizance of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I shall send him to Caesar. And Agrippa said to Festus, I myself also would desire to hear the man. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. On the morrow therefore, Agrippa being come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and having entered into the hall of audience, with the Chiliarchs and the men of distinction of the city, and Festus having given command, Paul was brought. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men who are here present with us, ye see this person, concerning whom all the multitude of the Jews applied to me both in Jerusalem and here, crying out against him, that he ought not to live any longer. But I, having found that he had done nothing worthy of death, and this man himself having appealed to Augustus, I have decided to send him, concerning whom I have nothing certain to write to my lord. Wherefore I have brought him before you, and specially before thee, King Agrippa, so that an examination having been gone into I may have something to write, for it seems to me senseless, sending a prisoner, not also to signify the charges against him. Acts 25. By F. B. Hole. Festus having arrived, he went up to Jerusalem after 3 days, and such was the animosity against Paul that at once the high priest and other leaders accused him, and asked Festus to have him brought to Jerusalem. Though years had passed, they would still fulfill their vow and wreak their vengeance. Such is religious rancor. Festus, however, declined this, so once more his accusers had to journey to Caesarea. This second hearing was practically a repetition of the first, as is shown in verses 7 and 8. Paul had merely to rebut a large number of unproved assertions. Now Festus, as the next chapter shows, had not got any intimate knowledge of Jewish things. Still, knowing them to be a people difficult to handle, he wished to gain their favor, and so suggested that after all Paul might go up to Jerusalem for his final trial. In this sudden change on the part of Festus we may see the hand of God. During the night that followed the uproar in the council, the Lord had appeared to Paul and told him that he must bear witness to him in Rome, and now he controls circumstances to bring this to pass. The suggestion from Festus led Paul to appeal to Caesar, a privilege that belonged to him as a Roman citizen. Paul knew that the proposed change of place was the prelude to his being handed over to his enemies, though Festus knew very well that he had done no wrong. If Festus began yielding to the clamor in order to placate the Jews, he would end by yielding everything. Paul's appeal settled everything. Having appealed to Caesar, to Rome he must go. This is the third occasion on which we find Paul taking his stand on his Roman citizenship, and here most evidently it was made to serve and work out the purpose of his Lord. The coming of Agrippa and Bernice to salute Festus became the occasion for Paul to bear a third testimony before governors and kings, and we are now given a much fuller insight into the mighty way in which he presented the truth. He had not failed previously to convey even to Festus that which lay at the heart of the whole matter, for in speaking to Agrippa of his case, Festus stated the controversy to rage around one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. This shows that, pagan though he was with no real understanding, he had grasped the central fact of the gospel. The death and resurrection of Christ are at the basis of all blessing, and the full declaration of the love of God. We know something of this, while he knew nothing of it. Still, Paul had made it plain. That it was all a mystery to Festus, in spite of his having rightly seized the point at issue, is evident from his address to Agrippa, when the court had assembled and, Paul being brought forth, the proceedings commenced. He had no certain thing to write to his lord, the emperor in Rome. He hoped that Agrippa, with his superior acquaintance with Jewish religion, might be able to help him to understand more clearly what was at stake, and know what to say.